Hello everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Andy, and we are continuing our series on Dante's Inferno. Now, before I begin this video, I have to have a short disclaimer. So, some of the content in this video, probably most of the content actually, a lot of people are going to be offended by. And I'm just warning you so that, if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, you can stop the video right now and not watch the rest of it. And especially to my Muslim friends out there, because I actually do know some Muslims, it attacks their deeply set beliefs. So, with those disclaimers out of the way, you're about to see one of the most horrific areas in this 8th circle, one of the most gory and grossest areas. So may I remind you that we're still on Malabolge, the 8th circle hell of fraud. And we've now reached the 9th ditch, which is the second to last one. There's only one more after this, so we're almost through the 8th circle. This ditch is only contained within one canto, and there's a lot that goes on, so I'm just gonna read the entire canto and see how it goes, and I'll explain it as I'm going. Who could ever tell, even in straight prose, the full story of blood and of wounds that I now saw? Often though it be told, certainly every tongue would falter, for neither our speech nor our intellect is capable of encompassing so much. If all of the people were brought together, who in that fortunate land of Epula mourned the blood they shed there because the Trojans came, then in that lengthy war when rings alone made such a mighty booty, and Livy, who never makes an error, writes, adding those who knew the thrones of battle when they stood up against Robert Guiscard, and the others whose bones are still collected at Separano, where every Epulan proved a liar, and those at Tagliacozzo were unarmed, the old Alardo triumphed, and though the limbs of some were gored and others severed, all this was nothing in comparison to the mutilations of the 9th abyss. So here Dante's basically saying that of all of the goriest battles and the grossest violent things you've ever seen in life, this pit is even more gory and gross than any of those. Even a barrel, with its mid or side stave missing, never gaped so wide as one I saw, split from chin to where the farming's done. The entrails dangled there between the legs, liver, lungs, and heart were seen, and the bleak sack which turns whatever is engorged to shit. While I was thus absorbed with watching him, he looked at me and opened his breast with his hand, saying, "See how I tear myself apart! See how mutilated Muhammad is! Ahead of me Ali walks lamenting. His face is split from chin to forelock, and all the others whom you see here were scandalmongers and schismatics when they were alive. For that they have been cut in two. A devil standing here in black tailors us thus cruelly, and then subjects the lot of us to still yet another sword cut each time we make the journey round the dismal path, because the wounds have all closed by the time anyone is back again before him. But who are you who brood off upon the cliff, perhaps to put off your own doom, which is determined by your own admission? Death has not yet come to him, nor has guilt brought him to be tortured here, said my master, but to give him a complete experience, it has devolved on me, who am dead, to lead him from ring to ring down here through hell. And this is as true as my talking to you." When they heard him speak, more than 100 stopped walking in the chasm to look at me, and marveling forgot their sufferings. "Tell Fraudulent then, you who soon perhaps shall see the sun, that unless he wishes to follow me here soon, he must fortify himself with such provisions that the barrier of snow deny the victory of Navarasa, which could not be otherwise be lightly won. Muhammad had already raised one foot to go before he spoke these words to me. Then he brought it down and started on his way. Did you just hear what happened? Dante saw none other than the Prophet Muhammad, the founder of the religion of Islam. And why would Muhammad be in a place like this? Well, the answer is that, you see, as Christians and as Catholics, we believe that there is no salvation outside the church. And this is often a very difficult topic to bring up because so many people are not Christians or Catholics. And many of you who are watching this that are not Christians or Catholics, this will probably terrify you. Now, it is possible that some outside the church may be saved because they were what's called invincibly ignorant. So someone can be ignorant enough, like they don't know about the faith and they don't know that this is actually something that's true, or understand like all of the nuances of Catholicism and all that. It is possible that God is merciful and he allows some people, perhaps, but it's not something that can be counted on. If something like that happens, we have no knowledge of what happens. Only God knows something like that. And as we discussed in the video on limbo, baptism is a necessary thing. And again, God can work outside the sacraments because he's God, of course, but the ordinary means, the way that you usually get into heaven is by baptism. And also here, it means to be in full communion with the church that Jesus Christ established. And of course, there's arguments with our Protestant separated brothers over this issue, but there is evidence in the church fathers, the writings of early Christians, evidence for the Catholic Church being the one true religion. And again, this is something that most of you will get offended by when you hear this, but this is what the Catholic Church has always taught. And so you have to understand where Dante is coming from. I mean, even if you completely disagree, this is where Dante is coming from. You see, someone like Muhammad took people away from Christianity. And if Christianity is the one true religion, then he is putting them in a state where they might not go to heaven. Now, again, someone could be invincibly ignorant and God might choose to save them, but you can't presume to. I mean, God is a just God as well as a merciful God, so you can't just say, oh, I'm good because God's merciful. It doesn't work that way. The safest thing to assume is that you need to be in communion with God's church. So yeah, this is a very difficult matter, like I said. So when the pilgrim Dante in this story sees Muhammad, he's completely slit down the middle. And that's because he split people away from the one true faith. You have to consider also that in Dante's time, there really hadn't been too many schisms formed within Christianity, because he lived in the late 1200s and early 1300s, and the Protestant Reformation didn't happen until the 1500s. So at that point in time, the only major schism was that of the break of the Eastern Orthodox in the year of 1054 AD. And that, of course, was a devastating moment in history when there were disagreements, and then the Church of the East, based in Constantinople, they did not recognize the authority of the Pope. And so they went off, and the Pope excommunicated them. And it was only in recent years by Pope Paul VI that the formal excommunication was like lifted. So it's not like there's any punishment for being Orthodox, like explicitly, but we are still separated by the wall of schism because our Orthodox brothers don't recognize the authority of the Pope. And later on, of course, we have the schism caused by Martin Luther and all others that broke off of him as well. I've heard that Martin Luther didn't intend to cause the schism, and the sad thing is with schism, it usually comes with people that are well-intentioned. There's injustices they're speaking out against, like in Martin Luther's case, he spoke out against the sale of indulgences. Now, most Protestants don't recognize that, like, what an indulgence actually is. Now, an indulgence isn't a bad thing in and of itself, but if the selling of one is a horrible thing because it's an act of simony. And if you didn't watch the video on simony, you should go back and watch that one. But even if Martin Luther was remorseful, and he did make a woeful statement that there are as many denominations as there are heads, is what his famous quote was. But he definitely caused the schism, and he ended up in that schism, and perhaps if he was repentant, he could have been saved from this terrible fate that you see Muhammad sharing. But of course we don't know. I mean, we have to hope and pray that people like him still made it. And of course there was others like King Henry VIII with his wives, and he didn't want the Pope to tell him not to divorce and remarry, so he just founded his own church. No offense to Anglican Christians, but that sounds like a pretty crappy way to start your church on. Again, like, I'm not saying that any Anglicans endorse that, but still, it's just, how would you like to have knowledge that your church was started because of that kind of situation? In more recent years, in 1958, there's a group of people that think that they're Catholics. They call themselves sede vacantists because they believe that, so sede means chair, and then vacant means empty. So they believe that the chair of St. Peter is empty. In other words, they believe that there is no pope right now because all the popes since Pope Pius XII have been heretics. And so, since they don't believe that the current pope is actually a pope, they disobey him, and they're in schism. And they also deny the validity of the Second Vatican Council, which is a legitimate council that must be accepted. And so because of that, they are regrettably in schism. And I actually learned about it because I actually met a woman who had those beliefs, and we had an epic texting conversation, and I learned a lot. And it's just sad to see people like that. It's like she grew up in that situation, so I definitely don't blame her for ending up in there, what she was raised by, but it's just a horrible thing, very negative and untrue beliefs of there not being a pope. And there's also, even more recent, the break with the Society of Pope Pius X. It's like an order of priests that they love celebrating the Latin Mass, and when the new Mass, the Novus Ordo, came out, Archbishop Lefebvre, the bishop in charge of that order, he was about to die, and so he was saying, well, we need to have more bishops so we can have more priests. And so he ordained bishops against the permission of the Pope, and so he got excommunicated. And there's a whole set of things where they argue, okay, now they're restored, but sadly, they're not really restored because they don't fully accept Vatican II, even though they accept most of it. They don't assent to some parts of it because they misunderstand that it can be interpreted through tradition. And also, they don't believe that the new mass, the Novus Ordo, is legitimate. And I can sympathize with some of the reasons that they give, because there are definitely problems, abuse of the liturgy, but that does not mean that liturgy itself is wrong. So it's just a very tricky thing. And people that go to the chapels of the SSPX, some of them are not in schism because they actually do accept the validity and everything like that, but they're just going there because they like the Latin Mass. So some people are going there and not in schism, but those people have to be really careful that they don't pick up the belief system that the priests are teaching, because the priests definitely are in schism. And of course, everything's gotten even more hard to deal with. The new motu proprio traditionis custodes that the Catholic news is completely blowing up over this. And I actually do attend a Latin Mass, so it is troubling, and hoping that our Latin Mass beautiful Latin Mass doesn't get taken away. But whatever we do, we cannot separate ourselves from the one true faith, the Catholic Church, the authority of the Pope, even if he is a bad Pope. Now, I'm not saying that Pope Francis is a bad Pope, but for sake of argument, even if he is, we still have to obey him. Just like I applaud the Catholics on YouTube, that like Timothy Gordon and Michael Lofton, guys like those, I really appreciate hearing their points of view, and I definitely like what they have to say about this issue. So anyways, if you cut yourself off, if you cause a bunch of people to leave, this is the sowers of the scandal and schism that is in this area. So the people who started the whole thing are the guilty ones they have to be slit down there because they're cutting people away from the true faith. But, as we'll see, schism, as in, the like sort of spiritual separation and all that, is not the only type of dealt in this abyss. This we'll continue to read. So, another man who had an opening in his throat, and whose nose has been lapped off to the eyebrows, and who only had one ear remaining to watch and wonder with the rest, in front of all others opened his gullet, which was all of crimson on the outside, and said, "You whom guilt does not condemn, and whom I saw above on Italian soil, if I am not deceived by overlikeness, remember Pier di Medicina. If you should ever see again the sweet plain from Vercelli slopes to Mercabo, and let the two best citizens of Fano, Messer Guido and Anchiolello, know that unless prophesying here is vain, both shall be thrown overboard from their own ship and drowned, not far from Catalonica, by the treachery of a loathsome tyrant. Neptune never saw a worse crime done between the islands of Cyprus and Majorca, whether by pirates or the Argive people, that traitor who sees with only one eye and rules the land with which someone here with me wishes he had never seen at all, will make them come to have a talk with him, and what he will then do will make all vows and prayers to fork his winds unneeded. And I to him, show me and explain if you wish me to bear news of you above. Who was he whom that sight was bitter? Placing his hand on the jaw of one of his companions, pried his mouth open, shouting, "This is he! And he does not speak. He it was who put an end to doubt in Caesar, by stating that a man prepared to act invariably suffers if he waits." How completely terrified he seems to me, with his tongue divided in his throat. Curio, who once spoke up so boldly. And another whose hands had been severed, lifted the stumps in the putrid air in such wise that the blood besmeared his face, and cried, You remember Moscow too, who said, poor wretch, once done, a thing is finished, which was the bad seed of the Tuscan people. And the death of your relatives, I added, at which, accompanying pain on pain, he went away like someone mad with grief. But I remained to watch the company and saw something that I would fear to tell about alone, without further evidence, except my conscience reassures me, that good companion which emboldens man with the coat of armor of its purity. I distinctly saw, and still seem to see, a figure without a head, walking about the way the others of that sad herd were. His hand held the severed head by the hair, swinging it as if it were a lantern. It looked at us and said, "Pity me." It made itself a lamp out of itself, and they were 2 in 1, and 1 in 2. How could this be? Only he knows who so rules. When he was at the foot of the bridge, he lifted high his arm, with head and all, in order to bring nearer what he said, which was, "Gaze at this fearful punishment, you who breathing go looking at the dead, and see if any is as great as this, and that you may have news of me to tell. Know that I am the same Bertram de Born, who gave the young king scoundrelly advice. I turned the father and the son against each other. Ahithophel, with his malicious prodding, did not do more with Absalom and David. For separating people so closely bound, I now, alas, carry my brain about separated from its base, which is this trunk. Thus you see in me how retribution works." Wow, very chilling imagery. All these severed body parts. Let's go and analyze who these different people were. First, we have Pierre de Medicina. He had basically his face, like his nose cut off and his ear cut off, and he had a slit in his throat. Now, doing a little bit of research, Pierre pitted 2 different cities against each other, and the way he did this was he went to one city and he told them bad stuff about the other city. He was like, "Okay, that city, like they're like doing all these bad things, and you should hate them, you know." And then they were like, "Oh wow, you tell us good information. We're gonna give you some money." So then after that, he went to the other city and he said, "Hey, look, these guys over here, they're doing all these bad things. You see, you gotta get them, you know." And then they paid him money. So he was really greedy and he was doing it like informing to get money. And he pitted the 2 cities against each other. And so he was using his ears and his nose to sniff out all this information, and then he was using his vocal cords to speak and thus cause these horrible divisions and scandals. So it's those particular cuts. And then he introduces this mute guy, this that has his tongue cut out. And this guy, who was mentioned as Curio, is Gaius Scribonius Curone. And he was an orator. What he did is he was originally a part of the faction back in ancient Rome when Julius Caesar was starting to try to come to power, trying to, be the emperor. There was a general named Pompey who was fighting against him because he was fighting for the Republic. And this Curio originally was on the side against Caesar, but then Caesar decided to bribe him. So he's like, "Okay, you give me money, okay." So he basically turned sides, and he put an end to doubt in Caesar by stating that a man prepared to act invariably suffers if he waits. So he basically told Caesar, "You better not wait, you better just go ahead and destroy Pompey while you still have a chance." So he was basically instigating the war. So because of that, his speech, he was a skilled orator, right? So his tongue gets cut out. And then the next guy, the handless guy, the guy whose hands were cut off, Mosca di Lamberti. What he did was, so now this is the beginnings of the factions in Italy. So I told you before about there's the political parties, there's the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, and the Guelphs are the ones that are loyal to the Pope, and the Ghibellines are the ones that are loyal to the secular state. And of course, there's factions within the Guelphs as well, but at the beginning it was just the Guelphs versus the Ghibellines. Well, how this all came about was because of this one guy started the incident that sparked the revolt and the things against it. It's like they said that World War I was caused by the killing of, was it Archduke Ferdinand? I forget, something like that. But like the whole World War I was caused just because this one guy got killed. And so it's a similar situation. There was this family called the Emidae, and they were a family that was feuding against another family, the Buondelmonte di Buondelmonte. He was, fighting with that other family, and they said, let's bury the hatchet. And the way that will ensure this is that you marry into the family. And so there was one woman that he was going to marry that was part of that family. But then the last minute he was like, actually I'm going to marry this other woman. And so the Amedi family was really angry about that their family got insulted by that act. And so this guy, Mosca di Lamberti, he was an advisor to the Amadei family. And he makes this one remark. He says, once done, a thing is finished. So he basically said, go ahead and kill this guy. He deserves to die. And because of killing that guy, it ended up causing these huge political factions that lasted, and countless wars have been fought, and just because this one guy in judgment raised his fists. So he gets his hands cut off for making those judgments with his hands, So then, last and least, Bertram de Born was a poet, actually, who liked to write divisive and warmongering poetry. And so he wrote the songs encouraging the rebellion, and he says right here, admits that he turned the young King Henry against his father, King Henry II. And so he turned a son against his own father to take over the throne. And he mentions Ahithophel, a biblical figure whom in the second book of Samuel, he was this creepy, shadowy guy who advised Absalom, who was King David's son, to rebel against his father, his good father, and try to take over the kingdom. And it was a really sad end because David still loved his son Absalom. And Absalom got caught in a tree and was hanged to death, and his father mourned his death. He condemned those that were attacking him because he ordered that he be brought back alive. King David is the one to listen to avoid going into schism, because he recognized authority. Even King Saul, who was throughout pretty much David's whole life of his youth, King Saul was chasing him down to try to kill him. And David had several opportunities to kill him, and he didn't, because he recognized that Saul was God's anointed one. David defended King Saul at all costs, even though he was evil and hunting him down. So he recognized authority. And that's what we have to do as Catholics. We have to recognize the authority of the Pope. And all these scandals, all these extra other types of scandals, like you see corrupt bishops and priests, um, with all the sexual scandals causing all that, those kind of sowing all those scandals within the church, and everything seems like it's like there's going to be tons of people in this one ninth abyss, all torn, and with all the sexual abuse scandals, you can only imagine what would be severed here in hell. I'll leave that up to your imagination. Okay, now before I go, I just have to talk a little bit about exactly what it means to be divisive or not divisive. Because the thing is that I'm finding that, especially in the world of Catholic YouTubers, there's a lot of hate going around and a lot of accusations, people being called divisive who are not necessarily being divisive, and those who are really divisive, but they're saying that they're not divisive. So, again, I'm not like an expert on everything, but this is kind of just my opinion. What exactly does it mean to be actually divisive versus what is not necessarily being divisive? Okay, so in Scripture, we see St. Paul talking about that, like some people are saying, "Oh, we're in Paul's band camp, or we're in Apollos' band camp, or whatnot." And Paul is pointing out, like, you should be following Jesus. You shouldn't be saying, "Okay, I'm part of this particular faction of the church, or I'm with this guy, or I'm with that guy." But we are supposed to follow Jesus, right? So that is an example of uh, when it really is, being divisive. But on the other hand, Jesus has said, "Did you think that I have come to bring peace to the world? No, I've come to bring not peace, but a sword. And mother will be pitted against daughter, and all family relations are going to be pitted against each other because Jesus has come." Now, here's the distinction that you got to look at. You might be thinking, okay, well, is Scripture contradicting itself here? Well, and the answer is no. So the thing is that Jesus is divisive in the same way that God hardened Pharaoh's heart in the book of Exodus. So, in the book of Exodus, this is a common discussion that has to be had, that God is not intervening with Pharaoh's heart. He's not saying, "Okay, I'm going to force Pharaoh to have a hard heart so that he can work miracles and like destroy him and stuff." No, that's not how it works. You see, the thing is that God is being all good and loving, and Pharaoh sees God, but he chooses to reject him. So it's like God is like the sun blazing down, and Pharaoh is like a piece of clay, and it's going to be dried out by the sun. So he's not like forcing him to be doing that, but it's just kind of what happens because of the state of his heart. He's like allowing himself to be hardened. So in a similar sense, Jesus is not saying that he actually literally wants to cause division. Jesus is not saying, "Okay, I need you all right now. I need you to turn against each other, and then that would be pleasing to me." No, of course he doesn't want people to be fighting against each other. But the fact is that there are hard truths in Christianity. And Jesus says that he is the way, the truth, and life, and no one comes to the Father except through him. And a lot of people will not accept that because it seems like it's very rigid, and who are you to say that you have the only true religion? And so people are going to be angry at the people who are saying that, and so people are going to naturally turn against each other. But Jesus himself is not trying to make this be an outcome. It's just how people are reacting to Jesus. And so, in the same way, there are a lot of people on the Catholic right who are saying things that are unpopular, but they're not saying it so that they can cause the division, but they're just saying it because it's true, and then people end up being offended by it. Now, on the other side of the coin, some of these people are not necessarily concerned enough about being tactful. And I've heard lots of complaints from people on the right, and I do get this. I mean, there's a lot of horrible heresies going around, and fully agree that all heresies need to be fought against. But I don't think it does any help to use a tone of voice where it's always in a condemnation tone of voice, especially like on my channel right here. I'm not trying to be mean or anything by what I'm saying. I'm literally saying it because this is just what is true. I'm saying I have to be clear that I'm not trying to offend anyone. But if you're just being like, okay, well, we have to just say angry things and people are going to agree with us because we have the truth, and unfortunately that's not really how it works, because if you have that sort of attitude, you're not going to win people over, even if you are true. So my perspective is that we need to use a tone of voice that is tactful. And I know people on the right are going to disagree with me over this, but I think tone actually does matter. It's not something that you can just brush under the rug. Oh, you're complaining about my tone, that stupid thing. We should care about the truth. Well, yes, tone is not as important as the truth, obviously. But that does not mean that we can't still be tactful. And people like to talk about ecumenism as if it's like a horrible heresy or something like that. But true ecumenism speaks to people at their level and tries to win them over to the Catholic faith. False ecumenism doesn't actually want to convert the person. They're just like, oh, just let them believe whatever they want to believe. That's obviously wrong. But true ecumenism reaches out to people on their level and tries to bring them in. And so that is a less divisive approach than to just be like, okay, this is the hard truth, and I'm going to say it like in an angry tone of voice, and you're going to agree with me because it's true. And that's not a good attitude to have. I guess that's all I really wanted to say about that. So I end this video with a serious note that whatever you do, stay within the bounds of the church. And whatever you do, stay out of hell.